BHP Billiton and Qantas are the latest companies to weather strike action. The big miner is under pressure to deliver better working conditions, with work stoppages running throughout this week to disrupt its coal mines. And today, Qantas engineers say they'll take strike action from next Monday. But there's also a growing unease across business that the new Fair Work Australia laws are re-empowering unions in their negotiations. So what is going on? Well, I spoke to Dave Noonan, National Secretary of Australia's largest construction union, the CFMEU, on a site in Sydney today. Dave Noonan, thanks for joining us here on site.
It's a pleasure, Tiki.
Now, you fellas seem to be causing a bit of concern for employers, particularly in Victoria, after that Wonthaggi desalination plant negotiation. A very generous deal for workers, productivity fee pay rises totalling 27% by 2015. This might create a new benchmark for workers across Australia.
Well, I think the first thing to note is that the Wonthaggi agreement was negotiated without any industrial action with employers. It was an agreement done by consent and without a great deal of controversy.
Wasn't this more about employers keeping the peace with workers?
Well, I think the reality is that the employers agreed to that knowing that there was a project which would require a highly skilled and productive workforce, and that's what they've got. In respect of fears of flow-ons, well, employer groups, of course, are paid to defend the interests of their members, and the interests of their members are often served by them making some of these sorts of claims. For our part, we're not ashamed. We're actually proud of negotiating the best wages and conditions we can for our members.
Now, Fair Work Australia has changed the IR landscape. We've had the recent JJ Richards case, which now means you can take strike action in non-bargaining periods where majority workplace support is not yet determined.
Well, I'm not an expert on the JJ Richards situation. I think that's in the transport industry. My understanding is that in that case you had a situation where the employer had refused to negotiate despite their workers wanting to negotiate.
But this is a big step. I mean, it means that strikes are no longer a last-minute action.
What it means is that you would still require a majority of the workforce to take protected industrial action. What we had, of course, under the WorkChoices system was a system where workers and unions had almost no rights at all. So we're coming off a very low base. The situation is that what we're seeing is a moderate and measured rebalancing of the system, which certainly does not go as far as many people in the union movement would like. We would certainly like to see some of the lower paid workers improve their situation. But as much as anything, it's driven by the economics in what is actually a patchwork economy in construction, as it is right across Australia.
Now, the CFMEU have also had a very big victory with Rio Tinto in the Pilbara with its 400 mainly trained drivers. The principle of collective agreement is now there in the Pilbara, isn't it?
Yes, and of course that comes from a situation where, notwithstanding the fact that those workers had wanted the union to represent them and had wanted the right to have a collective agreement, they were denied that right by the unilateral decision of Rio Tinto and by the fact that John Howard's WorkChoices allowed them to be denied that right.
But you'll be able to build on this now in the next round of negotiations with Rio in 2 or 3 years' time.
Well, I think what happened here is that we've got workers that for many years have said that they wanted the right to be represented by a union. And the legislation has belatedly given them that right. This is not revolutionary. This is absolutely on foot with what happens in most civilised nations around the world, and it's about time that some of the more extreme voices amongst the employer community recognise that.
Now, just one on the skills shortage. I see David Stewart from Leighton's calling for a ramp-up of the guest labour scheme.
Before companies go overseas looking for guest labour, we ought to make sure that Australians who've got the suitable skills are employed first, people already in this country.
Are construction companies providing sufficient training?
Well, that's patchwork as well. The site we're standing on at the moment has apprentices, and we know that on this site there will be a constructive approach by the employer to actually ensuring that there are sufficient numbers of apprentices to make sure that the lifeblood of the industry flows into the next generation. But we've seen a number of employers, and I have to say I was on a Leighton site recently in New South Wales where I met 200 construction workers, and they told me that they had not one apprentice. So if Mr Stewart wants to start talking about skilling up the Australian industry and skill shortages, he should start at home. He should start with Leighton's.
And finally, was it a relief that Peter Reith was not made President of the Liberal Party over the weekend?
Well, I think it's Tweedledum and Tweedledee, but look, you know, for us, if Peter Reith had have got the job, then every Australian worker would have known for sure that if Tony Abbott was voted in, Peter Reith would be pulling the strings, and we'd know what his record is on workers' rights.
Dave Noonan, thank you very much for joining Late Line Business.
Thank you, Tiki.